At the Johnson County Courthouse today, District Attorney Steve Howe said no criminal charges would be filed against Chiefs wide receiver Tyreek Hill or his fiancée, Crystal Espinal. In mid-March, Overland Park Police had taken 2 reports at the home of Hill, one for battery and one for neglect. Both involved the couple's 3-year-old son. Where does this leave the situation? We're here to talk about it with Chiefs beat reporter Brooke Pryor, award-winning investigative reporter Laura Bauer, and columnist Vahe Gregorian on Sports Beat KC, a sports podcast presented by the Kansas City Star. I'm Blair Kerkhoff. Hey, before we get started, let's listen to a clip from Howe. Here's what he had to say.
This office has reviewed all the evidence compiled by these agencies and has declined to file charges against Tyreek Hill and Crystal Espinal. We are deeply troubled by this situation and are concerned about the health and welfare of the child in question. We believe that a crime has occurred. However, the evidence in this case does not conclusively establish who committed this crime.
That's pretty strong. The question is, to what degree is there closure on this situation? Vahe, I'll start with you.
Boy, Blair, I feel like there really is no closure on it. I feel like it's another, link in the chain in a way, but I feel like we're still waiting to see what this really means. I certainly don't think it's an exoneration. It actually, in some ways, was pretty eye-opening and disturbing how many times Steve Howe referred to a crime was committed. Something happened here, and we can certainly go into this more, but that to me, we're still left with a lot of questions.
No doubt about it. And Laura, you watched the press conference today. We all watched the press conference. What struck you about what Steve said?
Many times he said this child has been hurt. And I found that very eye-opening because typically you will have a prosecutor just stand up there and say that no charges will be filed. He went that extra step. I've even talked to a child advocate since the press conference who her words were, "I'm so glad he did that." He stepped forward and said that this was wrong, that this happened to this little boy. And he also wanted the public to know, and he said it many times, I counted, my last count was 4 or 5 times, this child is safe, this child is safe. He wants people to know that. The frustrating thing maybe for the public is everything that happens now is going to happen in private. And it is about this little boy. And when the DCF investigation, another thing that he said so many times was, rest assured, there's another case ongoing. And what he means by that is DCF is still on the case. Now, what's interesting is DCF can't tell me that. I've asked them many times. State and federal laws prohibit them from talking about any case, any child, any process specifically. That generally, from our reporting, we know what's going on because we've done other child abuse case. So basically, when law enforcement is looking at whether state laws were violated, what DCF looks at is the child safe? They received a report, which they confirmed to us in mid-March, and they confirmed that they were investigating that report. They cannot tell us what that report is, but the investigation begins that day. The call comes in, the investigator begins looking at it. And they have to determine if whatever the call was, if it's substantiated or unsubstantiated. But their number one priority is that child safe and does that family need services? That is what is going on right now. Were you all struck by how many times he wanted people to know that this child was safe?
Yeah, and to me, kind of going off that, one thing that jumps out to me was he was asked, is the 3-year-old, their son, was he failed because charges weren't filed? And Hal said, in a sense, yes, because we want to hold people accountable who hurt children. There's other mechanisms to protect that child than filing charges. And then he elaborated a little bit more. And then the other, I think, pertinent part of that quote was, that's why the child protection case will continue. And so to that point, if he wants people to know, hey, the criminal investigation is over, but we're not done. We're not done intervening here. Right. We're not done making sure that this child is safe. And he wouldn't say where the child was, whose care he was in, if he had actually been removed from the home. We've reported that he has been removed from the home, but he did make it very clear that the child is safe.
And maybe Vahe, you can jump in here. I think he was trying to say, somebody's got this kid. We got the kid. We are protecting the child, and that's what's most important. He also doesn't want people to violate the child's rights. He wants them to protect this little boy. But he couldn't have been stronger in his words, in my opinion.
Well, without being specific, he couldn't have
Right.
been stronger. And I guess that's sort of how it all folds together. And the thing that strikes me, it's sort of the very point you were making, but a strong emphasis on we're deeply troubled, problems for the child, but also, as you just noted, Laura, repeatedly saying the child is safe. I think it's reasonable to take that as if the child is safe, then the child is still in some other care.
Is
that not
with the people who hurt him.
Right.
I mean,
right.
because you can't; those would be contradictory statements if you look at it otherwise, and it reflects previous reporting as well. But it suggests that it's ongoing.
Right. And, DCF can't say what they're doing, but their number one goal is to make sure that child is safe. They have services put in place that they can offer the parents. Sometimes those are taken, sometimes those aren't. But one thing that Advocate Lori Ross just said to me was, she goes, Laura, this happens all the time. The public is going to think, oh my goodness, they didn't hold anybody accountable for this. She goes, we see this in almost every child abuse case that we see where it's not a near death or death experience. And she said, and the reason why is, maybe the child can't speak up and say, this is what happened to me. The parents aren't going against one another. I think she said, no one's fessing up and no one's ratting on the other. And so you see this, and she said, so we think, and her quote was pretty strong, she said, we think when bad people hurt babies that someone goes to jail, and that's not the case. But she also said what happened today is he let people know that this is not acceptable. And so I do think that is an important thing, and I was really glad that she weighed in on that because I do think that's crucial. This will go on. I mean, these cases can go on for months and many, years. Who knows? And I don't know what can be said about this at this point, but Crystal is pregnant with twins, and DCF obviously would know that. And there's more to the situation than just a little boy.
So what is the evolution of the case from this point? So, as you said, Steve Howe was somewhat dramatic today, I thought.
Right. He was speaking as a dad and as a prosecutor, I thought.
Yeah, which is funny because when you prepped me for that interview, we thought we were going to get a lot of one-word yes and no responses, and we got the exact opposite.
I know.
Toward the end of his news conference, he mentioned that he's the
Father
Father
of four.
Yeah.
and how it affects him. So, yeah, as you say, it can go on for weeks, months, maybe even years, taking into account the age of the child. And when I said earlier, there doesn't seem to be closure here. There might not be closure for quite a while.
Right.
So what's the evolution? What can happen from here?
I can talk generally, and not every case is the same. Everyone has different elements and factors involved. But if a child's been removed, which our reporting has shown that they have, parents are told that they have to do certain things to get that child back. And when DCF and the courts are involved, and if you have a child in need of care case, that means the courts are involved. The courts are saying, you need to do this. And, I do a lot of reporting on cases, and they ended up being very tragic. But DCF knocks on the door and they don't answer. And they don't have to. In this case, you have to, because your child has been removed, you have signed on, and so the court's involved, DCF's involved, and they say, in order to get your child back, to know that the child is safe, you have to do this. So that's what we are never going to know. Sometimes families talk and friends talk and stuff, but in this case, DCF is not saying a word. I called last week to say, have you wrapped up your case? And they could not even say that. They cannot say status. They can't do anything.
And even it seems like when it's over, I asked Steve Howe if afterward, if he could tell us when it's over, if he could divulge some of the things that we asked him, and he said no. And likely the case files will be sealed as well.
Yeah. And another thing that Lori Ross said to me was, she goes, these are the cases that keep me up at night as an advocate. These are the cases that keep prosecutors up as an advocate. Because, she said he stood up there and said a crime has been committed. And he's going to bed at night knowing that he couldn't prosecute that. And she said that's hard because then what if something happens further, or what if something else? Those are very difficult. But there will be a very strong process that goes on now with this little boy. And, our reporting has shown he's not in the home. And I have talked with parents who it's taken years to get their children back. And sometimes it's as simple as, we want you to get a bed. We want you to have a stable job. Other times it's, you need to go to anger management. You need to go to classes. Domestic violence is totally different. Oftentimes they want the parents split before one can take on the child to know that the child's safe.
How much can we extrapolate, and this is probably sort of another question for you, but from the idea that his strong suggestion, if not almost direct reference point all throughout, was that there's something amiss in the relationship that is preventing this from being getting clarity. And does that play into what you're saying about the future of the child and
Yes.
the children? I mean,
Yes.
and he seems to be sort of taking us there.
Yeah. And after talking to people after the press conference, I think it's clear that he was sending a message. And sending a message to someone in that relationship that somebody's not saying the right thing, or somebody needs to come forward and protect this child. He was also, some would say, sending a message to the chiefs of, this is not a person or a situation where no wrong was done. And,
Especially with a guy, when we're thinking about a guy who comes into this with what he did.
yes.
Let's go there. Vahe, you and I were covering the Chiefs in 2016 when they drafted him, and I remember the night that Tyreek Hill was drafted. It was such a it was in the 5th round, right? So it was on the final day. So it was afternoon actually, but it was it raised eyebrows. There was controversy, and a brief background. Brooks, jump in if I'm wrong about this. He was dismissed from Oklahoma State for was it battery he was charged with?
For strangling Crystal, who is then girlfriend, now fiance, now pregnant with twins.
Then pregnant.
Then also pregnant with the 3-year-old. She was 8 weeks pregnant, and he strangled her and just kind of roughed her up.
So as soon as Oklahoma State learned about this, he was this happened. I can't exactly remember the month that it occurred.
I believe it happened after the Bedlam game, after the OU game.
After he was a star.
So it would have been late November.
Returned a kick
right.
to win the game
right.
for Oklahoma State, and was dismissed from the team before Christmas. I think before even the holidays, and surfaced at West Alabama Division II school, and continued, just played one season there, but he was eligible for the draft. The Chiefs took him in the 5th round. They're undoubtedly falling to the 5th round because of the troubles. And then, Vahe, you and I were talking about this earlier. I'll never forget can't say his breakout game because he had so many of them as a rookie, but one of his first huge games was at Denver, and the night game at Denver. He scored touchdowns in 3 different ways, becoming like the first rookie since Gale Sayers to score a receiving, rushing, and return touchdown. Was the star of the game. People remember, I think that was the game where he went into the end zone with, slapping hands with DeAnthony Thomas. So he was the AFC Offensive Player of the Week for that game. He came to the news conference, as the Chiefs do when someone wins a weekly award. They bring him to the news conference. He hadn't been coming to news conferences that year. We didn't get to speak to him at all, except for I think in training camp. So he was asked about his transgressions, and what what kind of program the Chiefs had him on, and what he was doing in the community, and I remember you and I having a conversation about this. I know you were troubled by the draft pick, but as I recall, your sentiment was, okay, they did it, they drafted him. Did we not pull for him because?
Well, that's right. Look, I mean, my sentiment was at the start that it was a very tin-eared kind of approach by the Chiefs to when they trotted out the idea of drafting him, that look, we vetted him, we know better than you, and don't believe your lying eyes. I mean, we know better. And so then you are confronted with this question, right? You've got a young man, 18 years old. What do you do with that person? And sort of my feeling was, in Kansas City, you have to be extra, even more, for a lot of reasons, but still with Javon Belcher on our minds, that's a different matter here than at other places. And Kansas City should feel different about that. Meanwhile, though, yeah, they've drafted him. Now what do you do? What are we supposed to root for here? And in my mind, what you're supposed to root for is the best of all outcomes, right? A sense of atonement, or if not reform, whatever it is, moving forward. And I think for the better part of all this time, the arc has seemed to be that until this, that, he completed all these things. I can't remember, Laura, you can correct me on the terminology, but I know the case was expunged, not the record. I'm not sure if that's the exact right thing, but after 3 years.
Yeah. Just
and-
in August. Yeah.
Just in August.
Yeah.
And I talked to the prosecutor in Stillwater at that time, and she was like, who's to say this isn't exactly what we want out of these cases?
Right.
So we've had certainly every superficial and even, relatively any public reason to believe that this has been going the way you want it to.
Well, people hoped for that second chance.
Yeah.
Sam McDowell and I wrote a story in 2016.
That's right.
After he started playing, and we spoke to people. And domestic violence people, advocates, were very upset. And they said, they were not on board, and they just felt that people needed to remember when they're cheering for number 10, they need to remember what had happened. But there was a big contingency that really wanted the second chance to work, that really wanted him to be successful, often on the field, and especially off. And you could tell, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, you could tell that by Andy Reid's quotes. I mean, we pulled one the other day. He is striving to be a better man, and that's what we're behind. It was something to that degree. So I think everybody's wondering, what is happening, today, and we did that second chance take. And now it's a little boy, though.
And one thing that I just remembered, and I'm trying to search it and see if we can find it, but shortly after that case was expunged, we saw photos online that Crystal was back with Tyreek, and their son was with them. They were at Royals games together.
I think it was August 26th.
Yeah, it was like
day.
the same
Yeah.
week or a day later. It was right then. And you could tell that they were really trying, that both like Tyreek and Crystal and the Chiefs were really continuing to try to push this narrative of the second chance. Things are better now. Tyreek went to a local food pantry with Crystal and his son. There are pictures that are still up on the Chiefs website. At this event. This was September 26th, and we talked with Tyreek after that because he won the NFL's weekly award for community service, and he said something along the lines of, I'm just doing this because I want to be a good example for my son. I don't want him to make the same mistakes that I did. He was really pushing that second chance thing, and so then when you see this story come out, it's even more frustrating, to use DA Howe's words, it is frustrating that you feel like we're all going down this path of the second chance, and we're pushing this narrative, and he's showing us that this is the person that he wants to be, all the while behind closed doors something else entirely is happening. And it can't, as Howe said today, they can't prove who did it. There isn't enough to prove charge either person with a crime, but it's clear that something has gone very wrong, and that second chance narrative, it's completely wiped away. Any good that's been done is gone.
One of the things that's been interesting in this, and something I tried to write about a few weeks ago, it's when we've all talked to the domestic abuse advocates, but one of the points they'll make first and foremost is that it's the recidivism rate you have to be thinking about, and that was as true then as now. What we don't know is what this whole framework began with again, right? We don't know when whatever issues there are came up again. We don't know if it started right away. We don't know, but it was one of the reasons we all were a little mystified, I'd say, about the reunion of those two, because who would presume to know what that means, right? As the expression goes, the heart has ways that the heart doesn't know, or something like that.
The heart wants what it wants. Is that
it's one of those things.
Justin Bieber lyric? I'm not.
But we can't account for that. But I think we always wondered what this all means, especially based on that timing of it coming right after the expungement. I mean, it was awfully interesting that happened that way. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think we know when something went wrong again here, but something clearly has gone wrong.
Well, and as part of the Oklahoma case, they weren't supposed to have close contact. You know, the little boy and Tyreek. So he, he had
I'd
turned
forgotten that.
3 in late summer. So this was not a little boy who really knew his dad until then. I mean, they didn't tell us how many supervised visits there were and things like that, but it wasn't, obviously an everyday thing. So you have to put that into play of what the relationship is. And one thing that also, and I'm going back a little bit, but one thing that struck me today is Howe was basically saying he felt he let the child down. Mm-hmm. He didn't say, one of the parents said, it was so strong on him. And typically, you may not see that in a child abuse case when the child is still healthy. So that was very interesting to me, that he couldn't have been stronger. And, there's many, many questions of, what sort of domestic violence prevention classes did he have? What kind of program was Tyreek in? It was supposed to be 52 weeks, but what are those? Was there accountability? Does anybody remember
and transparency thing that we talked about? I brought that up on the podcast yesterday when we were talking about Frank Clark, that there's a very distinct difference in the types of domestic violence courses and in the way and in their success rate. That courses that are structured in almost like a group therapy setting where there's accountability and transparency, and you're talking through things and you're admitting it, and it's a continued thing.
I am responsible.
Exactly. And you take ownership of these actions.
Yeah.
Those are much more successful at ones where maybe you're just talking to a counselor.
And do you all feel that from talking with Tyreek that he's ever felt? I know his first quote right after he was drafted left many questioning, because he said, I'm going to hang around with different people.
Well, he
Remember that?
had that, but that was, as I recall, and I might be remembering wrong, but it was part of more that he said also, though. I mean, in fairness to him, my recollection is the first time he talked when he came for that mini camp, there was a contrition there, and there was certainly a contrition in court. He might have also added, I think
Right.
that's kind of how it went, and it's one of those,
Right.
what do you seize on things?
But you felt accountability?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
I did too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I did.
Maybe it's what we wanted to see.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but I also remember a kid scared out of his mind talking to the media the first time there. He was not trembling, but he knew that was what he was there to talk about, and he was remarkably uncomfortable. And I guess you obviously would be.
Where does this leave the Chiefs?
Well, I don't think they know. And I think that they are kind of in the same position they were in this morning before the press conference was called, in that no, there were not criminal charges filed. So in a lot of ways, the DA didn't make the decision for them. Now it's on them. Now it's on them, and it's on the NFL. There's been some precedent set. There's the Ezekiel Elliott domestic violence case where he was never charged, but there was an investigation. And in fact, I think it was an Ohio prosecutor said, I personally believe that there were a series of interactions between Mr. Elliott and his accuser where violence occurred. However, given the totality of the circumstances, I could not firmly conclude exactly what happened. Saying something happened versus having sufficient evidence to criminally charge someone are two completely different things. And that sounds very similar to what we heard from Hal this afternoon, where we know a crime happened, but we can't prove who did it. And so the NFL was working on their own investigation at the same time. And eventually, a year after the prosecutor said that statement, in August 2017, the NFL suspended Ezekiel Elliott 6 games, and so about half a season. And that was how they chose to kind of adjudicate this, and that's how they punished Elliott. Now he's back in the league, still with the Cowboys. So I think that that's going to kind of be the baseline here. What I would expect is that it could be at least a 6-game suspension based on that precedent.
But is it different when it's a child?
It should be, but the NFL and the way that they have handled some of these cases I mean, Adrian Peterson was arrested for child, for hitting his kid with a switch. He's playing for the Redskins right now. And so, yeah,
The public knew more then, which I think is
right there,
interesting.
and there were photos then, and he was
Yeah.
actually arrested, and he's still playing in the league. So, in this
I believe
circumstance,
he defended his actions.
yeah, he
initially.
defended his actions. Yeah, so he mishandled that situation about as bad as you can mishandle a case like that, and he was still given another chance. So at this point, it seems like there's nothing that a player can do, with the exception of a Ray Rice situation where you cold clock your wife or your fiance and it's caught on video. Short
Hunt.
of that, Kareem Hunt. But Kareem Hunt has a second chance. He's playing for the Browns now, you know?
With an 8-game suspension.
With an 8-game suspension. So he is suspended, and there was a punishment, but you would think that a child being involved would make it different. I don't know that it does.
What's interesting, if you channel child advocates for a second, I think what was said today and what happened today in their minds is stronger than if there was a child endangerment charge. Because you had a prosecutor standing up there and saying, a little boy has been hurt and there's nothing I can do about it, and it frustrates me very much. From a child advocate standpoint, I think that is stronger than a misdemeanor charge. And,
Did
you know...
Did he just put the pressure on the Chiefs?
He did. I not Laura saying that, but I think the child advocates would say that. I think they would say that this is a message of, you know, he is the father of this child, and between the father and the mother, somebody hurt this child, and nobody's standing up for this little kid. So I'm going to, by telling you, I failed him because I couldn't bring charges. That is just for advocates who I speak to, you know, every week, several times a week. I think that is a strong statement.
Yeah.
And
I should clarify too. I think he was speaking not only to the Chiefs but to the NFL as well,
Which yeah, and now and
punishment comes from the league, not from the
right, exactly. And I think the interesting thing is that Howe said that the NFL had contacted him. He had not called them back. That he has to treat the NFL like the media in this circumstance, and he can't just give them, you know, case files and records that we can't get access to. If this case is sealed, he said it's highly unlikely that we share that information with them.
But we know that the NFL has tried to get information from the Overland Park Police.
Yes.
I think that's been reported.
And I believe they've only been able to get what we've gotten.
I think that was the implication of what
which is not
what he was saying.
Cover page.
right.
basically.
Yeah, so it's not a whole lot of anything, but I mean, yeah, Howe is pretty much saying, hey, here, it's like what you said. He is applying pressure to the NFL. Hey, I can't do anything about this, but you can. You know, we're making sure that the child is safe, but we can't charge anybody. We can't punish the person who did that. That's something that you guys can do.
All right, Vahe, what conversation should Chiefs officials be having?
Well, what they should be having, what they will be having, is a really interesting potential dichotomy. It seems to me the conversation should be, what do we think happened here, and what's our obligation if we believe that Tyreek was either complicit or directly involved in this? Not beyond the shadow of a doubt, just what we believe, what we logically believe. I think that's a reasonable thing for them to ask themselves. The thing I worry about is that that's no longer the standard in play, and that the standard in play is what's our plausible deniability and how good is he?
I think how strong words kind of didn't allow the whole thought of no charges, no foul. I just think that his strong words will have a bigger impact. But it'll be very interesting to see. I know that child advocates are going to be watching it very closely. And, you know, but I do think that, again, is why Howe kept saying that the little boy is safe. Because at least he was saying to them, we're doing our part of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of discussions going on with the Chiefs right now. I mean, this is a guy that was up for a record-setting contract extension that they were going to be working on this year, and I think that that's very much in doubt now. There is no clarity here, and I think the Chiefs, again, are going to have to ask themselves the question that they've asked and answered so many times recently. Is it, what is more important to them? Is it winning? Or is it sending a strong message that violence against women and children is unacceptable? And the last 36 hours have answered that question in a lot of ways, and not always in a way that looks favorably on the Chiefs.
All of this in the week during the NFL draft, a celebration of football, right? The 3-day festival that starts on Thursday. The Chiefs don't have the first-round pick, but we'll expect to be very active in the draft after Thursday. Hey, links to all of this coverage, the Tyreek Hill story and Chiefs coverage, can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Big thanks to Brooke Pryor, Laura Bauer, and Vahe Gregorian for joining us. I'm Blair Kerkhoff, and you've been listening to Sports Beat KC.